US. Philippines deploy anti-ship missile system in Batanes near Taiwan for war games. That short, stark line captures what happened along the thin, wind-scoured chain of islands at the northern edge of the Philippines last month. A deployment that has sharpened attention across the region and injected fresh urgency into an already tense conversation about the balance of power in the Western Pacific. Over the course of Exercise Balikatan, this spring, US Marines and Philippine forces moved a mobile coastal anti-ship missile system into the Batanes Island group, the archipelago that sits at the mouth of the Luzon Strait, just to the south of Taiwan. The system is designed to deny access by sea, a capability military planners call sea denial, and the choice of staging area is no accident. Batanes overlooks a corridor between major maritime zones. In a crisis, the island's command approaches that link the South China Sea with the Philippine Sea and the wider Pacific. That's what makes this deployment consequential, not just another routine training exercise, but a rehearsal of tactics and logistics that would matter in a real conflict. The weapon set at the center of the operation is a mobile, shore-based anti-ship system fielded by the USS Marine Corps. It can launch precision missiles against surface vessels at long range and is doctrinally intended to complicate an adversary's ability to operate within those sea lanes. During Balikatan, Allied forces practiced emplacement, sustainment, targeting coordination with maritime sensors, and live-fire demonstrations. American and Philippine military statements and reporting from multiple outlets describe the drills as part of the annual shoulder-to-shoulder war games that both sides use to sharpen interoperability and to send a deterrent signal. This year's Balikatan marked an expansion of roles and participants alongside US forces, Japanese amphibious units, and a contingent of Canadian TRO. Ops trained with Philippine forces. The exercises combined coastal defense drills, maritime interdiction, logistics and sustainment exercises, and live fire rehearsals. The presence of additional partners underlined how concerns about security in the first island chain, the string of islands that runs from Japan through Taiwan and the Philippines, down toward Borneo, have become a multinational preoccupation. For Manila, the exercises are a balancing act. President Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. has overseen deepening for the conflict, has overseen deepening defense cooperation with the United States, and his government has defended the deployments as cooperative training that improves the Philippines' ability to protect its maritime approaches. Philippine officials argue that improving coastal defense and practicing to hold key seaways is a sober response to real-world incidents in contested waters, from harassment of Philippine vessels to standoffs near shoals and features claimed by multiple states. NTS Manila has repeatedly said that deployments under bilateral arrangements are carried out at the invitation of the Philippine government and are intended to strengthen defense, not provoke conflict. From the US side, Pentagon and Marine Corps spokespeople framed the operation as an exercise in mobility and readiness, showing how expeditionary forces can move, set up and operate layered defenses on remote islands. In recent years, Washington has placed an emphasis on distributed maritime operations and the ability to place sensors and strike capabilities forward as a means to deter aggression and to complicate an adversary's calculations. Contractors, defense analysts, and service briefings describe these mobile coastal missile systems as one piece of a broader network linked to aircraft, ships, radars, and unmanned systems that together raise the cost of any attempt to use the sea to project force. Beijing predictably reacted with alarm. China's foreign ministry and other officials have called such deployments destabilizing and warned that they raise the risk of miscalculation. In recent weeks, Chinese diplomats have publicly urged the Philippine government to ask US and Philippine government to ask US forces to withdraw missile launches from Philippine soil, saying the presence of such systems close to Taiwan threatens regional stability. Manila has rejected that demand, stressing its sovereign right to invite allied forces for joint exercises and to build defense capacity with partners. That tension between a sovereign state's choice to host allied forces and a nearby great power's insistence that the deployments are a threat is the core political puzzle here. For decades, the Philippines has been strategically important to US planners because of its geography. The two countries are treaty allies, and under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, the Philippines allows forward rotations and access to agreed facilities. In practice, that means US forces periodically. From bases and locations across the archipelago, including remote northern islands like those in Batanes and the main northern island of Luzon. The presence of mobile, shore-based missile systems in these places is a relatively new development in operational terms, but is part of a broader effort to adapt to what planners see as the changing character of maritime competition. Military exercises always have an operational purpose and a political underside. On the ground, soldiers and sailors trained on emplacement and sustainment, moving heavy equipment by air and sea to islands with limited infrastructure, setting up communications and links to maritime sensors, and rehearsing attack profiles against surface targets. That last element, the ability to identify and prosecute moving ships at range, relies on a complex sensor web, satellites, maritime patrol aircraft. Surface ships and land radars must share information and produce accurate tracks. During the drills, commanders test those links, practice decision-making under simulated contested conditions, and rehearsed how to protect the missile systems from counterattack. The deployment has also invited questions about escalation control. If a forward mobile missile launcher is positioned within sight of commercial shipping lanes, how would commands decide when to shoot? How would civilian traffic be cleared? How would a misfire or a mistaken identification be contained so that it does not become the spark of wider hostilities? Those are not theoretical questions for professionals who study deterrence and crisis stability. They are practical operational issues that require clear rules of engagement, redundant communications, and robust risk reduction measures, all the more important when operations occur near a major democracy like Taiwan, whose defense is a central strategic concern for the region. Taipei's own posture has not changed publicly as a result of the drills, but the island's officials and commentators track any shift. Near the Luzon Strait, closely, Taiwanese authorities monitor shipping lanes and the movement of military assets around their immediate neighborhood. Any operation that rearranges the balance of sensors and strike assets in adjacent waters affects Taiwan's threat calculations and, by extension, the calculations of others. For Beijing, that proximity is a central grievance. Systems placed on Philippine soil that can reach into sea approaches near Taiwan are viewed as line of operation adjustments intended to constrain China's options. For Washington and Manila, the language is different. They talk about deterrence, defense, and protecting maritime commons. This deployment also fits into a pattern. Over the last several years, the United States has shifted more capabilities into the Indo-Pacific, mobile coastal defense systems, long-range fires, and increased rotational presence. The Philippines has been a focal point for that strategic adjustment. US officials say the goal was not to provoke conflict, but to strengthen the defenses of partners and to reassure allies that the United States will help defend shared interests, including freedom of navigation. Critics, including some in the region, worry that the introduction of more capable strike systems to peacetime settings makes crisis management harder and raises the stakes for accidental or inadvertent escalation. Inside the Philippines, public reaction is mixed. Some analysts and security commentators say the drills are necessary given the frequency of encounters with Chinese vessels over fishing grounds and maritime features. Others worry that becoming a forward operating area for powerful weapons makes the archipelago a potential lightning rod. Local leaders on island provinces where exercises were staged have expressed concern over environmental and economic impacts and the need to protect civilian movement and livelihoods during military operations. National leaders have to weigh thoughts, local concerns alongside broad strategic imperatives across the Pacific, other US. Partners watch carefully Japan, which participated in this year's exercises with amphibious and maritime units, sees shared interest in keeping approaches open and in deterring coercion in nearby waters. Canada's more limited participation points to the wider internationalization of what would once have been seen as a bilateral security relationship. For allies and partners, training together signals a common understanding that the maritime rules-based order requires both presence and capability. There are practical follow-on questions too. How long will these forward deployments remain in place? Are they temporary cyclical exercises, or will some capabilities have a more enduring presence through larger rotational patterns or more robust basing arrangements? Manila and Washington have been careful with language. Some announcements emphasize temporary rotations tied to exercises, others spotlight T capacity building for the armed forces of the Philippines, the answer matters to regional perception. A temporary rotation tied to an annual exercise communicates a different posture than a permanent emplacement or long-term basing of strike systems. Back in Washington and Manila, officials repeatedly say that these are defensive measures designed to protect sovereignty and to ensure rapid response in a crisis. The administrative context in the United States changed in 2025. The Trump administration that took office in January continues to prioritize shifting more defense capacity into forward positions across the Indo-Pacific. For Manila, the Marcos administration has sought both to strengthen economic ties abroad and to reassure the Philippine public that it can defend maritime interests, all while managing relations with Beijing, a powerful neighbor and trading partner. What happens next will be shaped by diplomacy as much as by any military calculus. Expect more statements. See. Fourthly worded, from capitals across the region, Beijing will likely continue to press Manila and Washington to reduce forward deployed strike assets. Manila will continue to assert its sovereign decisions about invited defense cooperation. Washington will emphasize alliance commitments and deterrence. Seoul, Tokyo, and Canberra will monitor, adapt, and where their interests align, deepen collaboration. And the islands themselves will remain what they have always been, strategic real estate at the confluence of great power interests. For reporters and the public, the bite of the story is not only the mechanical fact of a missile system being placed on an island, but the choices that follow. Will the deployment reduce the possibility of coercion by making maritime approaches harder to use for rapid force projection? Or will it, as critics fear, raise the chance of an unintended clash in a crowded maritime space? The answer depends on how well diplomats manage tensions, how clearly milli. Terry commands define and communicate rules of engagement, and how transparently exercises are conducted to avoid confusion with peacetime traffic. As the drills concluded, Allied officials emphasized training, interoperability, and the message of deterrence. Regional governments urged calm. And China's diplomatic objection remained firm. The deployment to Batanes will not be the only time neighbours test the edges of maritime competition in the months ahead. Instead, it is likely to be a reference point, a recent example of how states are preparing for contingencies that many would rather avoid. In the end, the islands are small, but their strategic significance is large. The men and women who sailed, flew and slogged through these exercises did more than move metal and missiles. They rehearsed decisions that in a crisis would have profound consequences. For the people of the region, the hope and the urgent task for leaders is to translate those rehearsals into policies and commute. Nations that lower the risk of miscalculation even as they maintain the capacity to defend sovereign rights. This episode in Batanes will be passed by analysts, argued over by diplomats, and referenced in future policy debates. It is a vivid example of how geography, technology, and politics intersect at the edge of the Pacific. And whether you view the deployment as prudent deterrence or a provocative escalation, the fact remains that it has focused attention on a narrow stretch of sea and a thin chain of islands whose importance far outstrips their size.